All right, we are live. So we'll let a couple people kind of log on. I know I already got a couple pings online. Thanks for joining me today.
Of course, happy to be here.
Yeah.
Always happy to chat.
For those of you joining today on today's What's the Buzz, we're talking about building a nimble workforce. You know me and I love my puns, but this one is very intentional. I'm excited to welcome a guest who has over 2 decades of experience in workforce development programs, tied to some of the most successful ones that I believe have been most successful in our industry in biotech. And right now is the Workforce Development Director at NIIMBL. You get that? A nimble workforce. So welcome, John. Let me give you the mic to make a quick introduction.
Yeah, happy to be here. So John Balchunas, as Chris said, NIIMBL's Workforce Director. Been with NIIMBL for about, I guess since 2018 officially, but been involved with NIIMBL since the beginning. And we'll get into this, but NIIMBL is the National Institute for Innovation and Manufacturing Biopharmaceuticals. We're one of 17 Manufacturing USA institutes funded by the federal government, all focused on innovation within different sectors of advanced manufacturing. In our case, it's on biopharma manufacturing. So happy to be here.
That's great. And workforce is clearly a fundamental element to the success of biomanufacturing, which is very labor intensive, right?
Well, correct. And I think, and from our perspective also, there's a lot of focus on, we're not only talking about biomanufacturing and biopharma manufacturing as it exists today, but also looking into the future. And so as you bring in new technologies and as, data analytics and continuous manufacturing become more factors at play into the manufacturing process, how does that impact the workforce, and trying to make sure the industry has the workforce it needs is sort of critical.
Yeah. Sounds like it's going to need to be more nimble.
Fair enough. we actually don't use that pun enough. We probably
I know, right? I'm sure it gets old over there, I bet.
That often.
Well, hey, why don't we start off, John, just so everybody can really get to know you and why, one, we're excited to have you on today. We're also excited to have you as an industry advisor to help guide some of the development we're doing into our workforce platform elements with the Talent Lab. But tell us a little bit about your journey in workforce development and kind of what brought you to NIIMBL.
Yeah, so let me backing up a little bit, or kind of telling my kind of whole career arc briefly. And this is it's kind of funny because I was just reflecting on this the other day when I was driving over near NC State and realizing it feels like yesterday, but then when I realized it was 30 years ago that I was in college, I was like, oh my gosh, it's like scary to think how quickly time flies. So crash course, career arc, did my undergrad back in the 90s at NC State in microbiology. Chalk it up to bad advising or just being a different person. It wasn't necessarily until my senior year, maybe in undergrad, that I realized, I don't really even like the way a lab smells, much less doing lab work. I love science. I love writing about it. I love talking to people who are smart and do science, but I don't have any desire to actually do it myself. And so I graduated and ran as far from science as I could over to the English department and got my graduate degree in technical communication. With the intention of staying in sort of the science community. So got into the industry, both in kind of startup biomanufacturing companies as well as larger multinational in vitro diagnostic manufacturers doing tech writing, online help, package inserts, the whole 9 yards. Got burned out doing that, but also learned the industry, learned how GMP manufacturing works, and really just fell largely serendipitously into a role at the North Carolina Biotechnology Center, which is technically probably the world's oldest government-funded organization focused on life science economic development or biotech economic development. So I fell into a role with them, leading their workforce development activities, and was there for about a decade. And that was kind of in this kind of gray space between industry, academia, and nonprofits. And that's more or less where I've stayed my whole career. And so I was with the Biotech Center for about a decade, doing a lot of needs assessment here in North Carolina, where I'm based, trying to understand the needs of the industry and that sort of thing, and communicate that to educators through all sorts of mechanisms. From there, made my way over to NC State, to the BTech facility, the Biomanufacturing Training and Education Center, which is the first simulated CGMP biomanufacturing training facility in the world when they opened up. Since then, there are facilities now all over the place that are that are similar. There are training facilities in Texas, training facilities in Pennsylvania. There's NIIBL in Ireland. There are new facilities popping up all over the country. And I think that's great. I mean, I think there's a huge need for training infrastructure just globally. And so it's great to see that, that's happening. And so anyway, that was a little bit of a rabbit hole, but I was with NC State and BTech. I was involved in kind of building out their professional development training program, basically the training that they do for industry. Mm-hmm. Most of my role is really business development, kind of forming the partnerships with with our training clients and kind of building that program. Along that time, NIIMBL, came into being. NC State and BTech was heavily involved in NIIMBL from the beginning, and I was, offered an opportunity to at least devote part of my time initially into this role as workforce director, and it just became far more where my passion lie in order to take some of what I've learned regionally and look for ways to apply that nationally. And so kind of came over to NIIMBL full time and been here since.
That's great. And so it's your career is definitely built, and now you're in this role where you can really make a national impact. The other thing that stood out to me, John, was and I share a similar pathway to you. I started off as a biology major in college, and after the second attempt at organic chemistry, I realized that the lab bench was not a spot for me.
Yeah. Organic chemistry was my same, but that was my downfall also. So yeah, fair enough.
All right. Well, we share that in common too. Yeah. But I never wanted to leave the science industry, and hence, right out of school, I became a recruiter, and within a year, I was started a life science recruiting practice.
Yeah.
So I never really left the field. I wonder, and I hear that a lot. That sounds like a really important opportunity for awareness and for, sharing that there are lots of opportunities in biomanufacturing and in the life science field that you don't need to be on a bench. And I know that's something that, that is an obstacle. Sometimes people think they have to be, working in a lab or working in a suite in order to be in the life sciences field, but that's just not the case. And you and I are both proof of that.
Yeah, well, no, and that's you're right, and it's why this problem is so difficult. I mean, and anybody who works in kind of the space of kind of talent acquisition or workforce development in this industry, I mean, anybody who's done any workshopping, all you talk about is the need to increase awareness in careers in biotech, and there's it is the paramount problem, and it's not. The challenge these days isn't just reaching, and I mean, it is a problem, and it is difficult to reach those students that are working in life science degree programs. But the industry needs to attract students from statistics, from
data science,
science, all these other degree programs that would normally have no traction into this industry. Yeah, and doing that in an industry that doesn't necessarily always have the best track record, in terms of the public trust and public perception, it makes it that much more complicated and that much more critical that we figure out ways to solve it.
And we're thankful that you're at the top there at NIIMBL working on that problem, because it's you brought up two good points. One, it's a PR element, right? Really a PR element, especially for a young audience who we want to make sure that understands, hey, you can make a big impact here. It's not just the big bad drug, makers charging too much for drugs and medicines. There's a real impact you can have in this field. So I think that's, there's a important part of this PR. And then the other part is just the boots on the ground awareness of these different roles. So that's part of what I think, makes it hard is it's both are equally important.
Correct.
Yeah. Well, so let's talk about NIIMBL, because I think you're in a role right now that can make and you are working on several programs. So, NIIMBL, is an organization. You have a lot of industry members. You also have a lot of nonprofit and a lot of university members. So you have this really great audience, all of which are really needed to impact the future of the workforce. So talk to us about some of the things that you're focused on right now. What are some of the programs or projects that are on your radar that you're moving forward or are focused on right now?
Yeah, gosh, where to start? I mean, and I can go into a whole nother diatribe on, strategically all our different areas of interest. And I don't know that I need to do that. But just to highlight, because it's a lot of the familiar space. I mean, it's increasing awareness. It's making sure, something that I probably won't expand on here, but just to mention it generally, there's a lot of interest and opportunity within NIIMBL and how we can capitalize on, what I'll call cross-regional partnerships. And we may come to the, bits and pieces of this later in the conversation, but there's I look at, there's a lot of great success stories in different regions of the U.S. and, whether it's North Carolina or Massachusetts or the Maryland area or Texas or California, but all of our individual regions tend to keep that stuff under lock and key, and it's competitive intelligence, it's economic development, advantage, and that makes sense, and it has to be. But there is pre-competitive space that we can work, and so trying to figure that out is one of our perpetual sort of challenges. It's one of the things we're noodling on. But
well, I will put a shameless plug in here, but that's exactly what with BioBuzz and our talent lab. So we're not trying to replace all these regional efforts. Our approach when we looked at the challenge was, let's create the roads and the pipes so that everyone can plug into it, and so we don't have to compete with, and have everybody compete. Everyone can do what they're doing really great and maintain it, but we create the roads and the pipes that really streamlines and reduces friction between how those people actually get to the employer. Because we're not, we'll let everybody else build the training and do the hands-on work and do the important work. We can work on the technology and the systems.
Yeah.
And I've been recruiting for 20 years. I've worked with thousands of hiring managers and thousands upon thousands of candidates. So we really want to put all of our energy in how do we create better roads and pipes that just connect all these things and let everybody keep their competitive workforce in their area but how do we make it more efficient? And efficiency is something we all really need because this costs a lot of money to do.
Yep. So to get back to your question, and I'm also I'm just keying in on a comment in chat about somebody not realizing that, and Repeater not realizing that NIIMBL had a national reach. And I just want to kind of address the comment that NIIMBL, that's part of what makes NIIMBL a unique beast, and it's a unique challenge, especially in the workforce development space, because workforce development, I've always said, is inherently a regional problem.
Mm-hmm.
And so trying to figure out how to approach that and drive synergies at a national level when we're not necessarily tied, to driving any one region forward is really kind of a challenge. But to answer your question, just what are we working on? Just more specifically, I think there's probably two different things that I can probably mention. One that's more targeting, sort of the students and the future workforce, and one that's more focused on the industry. And so, more at the student level, we've got our NIIMBL experience program, and folks can Google that, but it's our diversity and inclusion initiative. It's focused on freshman and sophomore, or rather first and second year college students, whether university or community college students, largely focused on Black, Latino, Native American, Indigenous populations, trying to give them some exposure through a 1 week, all expense paid tour of biomanufacturing, and basically taking time visiting facilities. We ran the program for about 4 years ourselves, realized there's folks out there in our member community that can work with students a lot better than we can. And so we piloted a model last year where we scaled it out to 3 different locations in the country. And this summer we're running the program in 5 different locations. And so
that's awesome.
It's a national program. And so students from
what locations do you know?
Yeah, I do. And so it's a national program, so students can come in from anywhere in the country, any college and or community college or university. But we're physically running programs in North Carolina, hosted by NC State, in Texas by the University of Houston, in California by Santa Clara University, in Pennsylvania by Thomas Jefferson University, and then also in upstate New York at Albany College of Pharmacy and Health Science. And so 5 different locations. We're hoping to reach probably 75, 80 students this summer. It'll be cool. And that's another one we could have a whole other conversation on, but it's been really interesting. It's been, humbling talking to the students. It's been humbling talking to the industry and realizing we're helping the industry learn how to reach these students just as much as we're helping the students reach the industry. And so we're kind of solving the problem on both ends. The other one that I'd probably speak to that's, got us pretty excited on the workforce side of the house is really trying to strengthen our ties with the, kind of the talent acquisition, recruiting, HR side of the house within our industry members. And so NIIMBL has roughly about 20 large industry members. So a lot of the big names in pharma are members within NIIMBL. A lot of the folks that are, paying to be part of the consortium and involved in NIIMBL are not necessarily coming from the TA and recruiting and HR realm. They're coming from MS&T, process development, that side of the house. Yeah. And what we're finding is, those folks don't always know their own HR folks. They don't know their talent acquisition teams. And so on the one hand, we're trying to broker those connections, help make those connections happen, but we're also trying to bring that community together, because I think the other thing that we've realized is there aren't a lot of industry-specific forums for the TA and HR community to talk, and they're hungry for it. You know, we ran a couple town hall meetings earlier in the summer, really just kind of spread some word to them on what NIIMBL's up to. And we did some breakout rooms, and whenever we'd start the breakout room, they'd start just all this crosstalk, and the conversation almost just ran itself. They were really eager. You know, well, what are you guys doing around apprenticeship? We didn't know you guys were doing something. You know, we heard that you guys dropped degree requirements. What are you guys doing? And so there's all this crosstalk that was fascinating. And so
that's awesome. It's tough. You know, this industry is so, like, just by nature, we kind of stay insular. Don't even companies stay insular sometimes. And sometimes we need an organization like NIIMBL to kind of crack that shell and get us all talking more in right, that trusted, you know, because NIIMBL brings this trusted environment to the table.
Yeah, and that's kind of where we're going with this. And this is kind of an experiment, but we're running a rather large conference as it's designed now. So probably a couple 250 people maybe in the April timeframe. We're still trying to lock down a specific venue, but looking at Boston in the April timeframe to basically hold what we are tentatively calling a United States Biopharmaceutical Manufacturing Talent Acquisition Partnership Conference. And so basically trying to bring together, on the one hand, the whole TA, hiring manager, HR stakeholders from the industry. On the other hand, trying to bring together the passionate educators, career service offices, regional nonprofits, as well as, you know, kind of the national nonprofits that are acting as, you know, sort of sources of talent. And you know, think of folks like Jobs for the Future or Thrive Scholars or 110 and some of these big, huge national intermediaries that you know, kind of dabbling in the sandbox too. Really trying to get some good new partnerships happening. And so the conference will be a mix of, you know, both, you know, sessions like you'd expect at the conference, but also a healthy chunk of partnering. And so folks will have tables they can deck out with their tablecloths. We'll have a considerable amount of time for, you know, for networking. And so really trying to help broker some new connections. And I think one of the things we hear on both sides of the house is it's hard to pin down the other. And so we hear from the academics all the time, it's hard to pin down the industry to talk to them. And so, okay, let's put them at a table and really allow that round robin of conversation to happen. And then on the flip side, let the same thing happen, you know, with the educators at the table to kind of share what it is they're doing. And so we're excited to see how the event comes out. We've got a webinar coming up at the end of November, just to give another shameless plug, or a shameless plug on our end. We've got a webinar at the end of November. I think there's probably information on our website about that, but
great. We'll share that out also afterwards.
Yeah, we're going to tease that event in that webinar. So more to come. Great.
That's a big initiative. I mean, I think it's so important. The intermediary is so important in this field because, you know, like you said, everyone, especially in this market, tends to be a little bit there tends to be some barriers up.
Yeah.
And it's challenging, and it costs a lot of time and energy for all these, you know, smaller nonprofit organizations to do the outreach and to the engagement. They don't always have people to do that. The same person that's often doing the training is also in charge of outreach, right? Like, so being part of a larger conference, I can see a tremendous amount of value in pulling all that together.
Yeah, so we're excited. We'll see how it goes. I think the other, you know, this is also the other big test, and where this is sort of a pilot is, you know, how much will that community talk? I mean, they haven't had a lot of opportunity. Is it as competitive as we think, or will it go pretty smooth? So it'll
That's
be
a question I'd ask. Like, what's your general temperature on that? Like, do people look at each other as competitive in TA, or are they trying to keep trade secrets?
I think on the surface they do, because they have to, and it is a competitive market, and especially in TA, where TA, and I'm not in TA, but I work closely enough with that community to understand speed is everything. And so there is a lot of competitive pressure. And if our shop can pull candidates through 2 days quicker than our competitor, then we're better off. And so I think on the surface, yes, there is a lot of competitive pressure to probably not want to talk, but I think that's really superficial. And I think once people have the opportunity to engage, I think they eat it up. And I think, you know, I'm optimistic that this conference will be very effective in kind of bringing that group together and kind of breaking down some barriers around, you know, sort of pre-competitive collaboration and just realizing they can do it.
Well, I'm excited for it. It's going to be on my radar as soon as you announce the date. Well, good. Let's talk a little bit more. Thank you for sharing all that about NIIMBL. I saw in the comments, it looks like some people weren't aware of some of the reach that you had. So I encourage everybody, and we'll share some more information. We shared a piece that another interview John did about NIIMBL recently through BioBuzz, and we'll continue to promote the work he's doing. Let's talk a little bit about ecosystems that are doing workforce development really well. I'd like to talk about North Carolina. I know you're intimate to that experience. You were part of that early on, development of it. But I look at work, and being in the recruiting industry, talking to candidates, recruiting for clients in North Carolina. They've done a really good job, and I'll let you elaborate. But to me, they've really done a really good job of building the infrastructure, the foundation, building a long-term plan, short-term results. Maybe just, can you talk about the North Carolina workforce development ecosystem kind of, and what your reflections are on it?
Yeah, I'm going to try and jump around a little bit here. I think you're right. I think there's been a ton of success in North Carolina, and I think, I'm very kind of proud and humbled to say, North Carolina is home, and have some good friends at the Biotech Center where I used to work that are really at the helm in a lot of this. And I think that's a piece of it. And I think, we were talking before all this started, I think one of the really key pieces to this is, in North Carolina, the North Carolina Biotech Center and NC Bio, the trade association, have both been very central in working together as sort of the lead conveners really since the beginning. And so going back all the way probably into the 80s and early 90s, they've really been seen as kind of the trusted voice and the lead convener and kind of bringing that ecosystem together. And it's really paid off. And I think as a quick, rabbit hole or digression, I think one of the challenges that I see in a lot of regions now is there's a lot of people vying for that top trusted position. And even in North Carolina, I see more of that. There's more people in the sandbox. There's more people that are involved. But, in North Carolina, you've still got a lot of trust and respect from a couple different organizations that are playing lead role. And I see a lot of regions are kind of in this space of trying to figure out who's on first and who is going to be sort of that lead trusted voice and the prime voice in the region. I think that's a challenge. But in North Carolina, that wasn't, that worked out, and that there was, at least when all this was sort of going, getting rolling, again, probably late 80s, early 90s, mid 90s, a lot of that was championed by NC Bio and the Biotech Center. And, if I look specifically, I think the other big factor in North Carolina is that a lot of at least the workforce development activity was really championed by the industry. And so it was, if I go back to the days of, before BTech, it was really the country club meetings of, the biomanufacturers, all the site heads from all the biomanufacturers at the time would meet together, monthly, every couple of months, and just kind of gripe, share war stories, share what their problems are, complain about challenges with the water and everything else. But workforce was a big issue that kept coming up. And I think they realized that in order for their own workforce to grow, North Carolina needs to keep bringing in more companies, and that's going to happen. That's inevitable. That's a good thing. They also realize that they're inevitably going to keep poaching everybody's employees, and that's also healthy. I mean, our industry thrives on being incestuous, and I think that's a good thing. But I think they also realize that if that's all going to happen, then we have to have a way of backfilling the talent. And so industry became very vocal in kind of championing that message to fund the investment of programs at sort of the community college and university level. And so all that led to BTech. It led to a lot of investment at the community college system through Bio Network. It led to Bright at one of the minority institutions at NC Central. And all that has sort of grown like gangbusters in the years since. And, they just received a couple of years ago a big Build Back Better grant from EDA. And I think all this is sort of growing, but I think having industry really not just a passive voice and consumer, but really there in the driver's seat has been helpful. I think some of that at the time, just looking back, I think some of that was also situational and luck, in the sense that the companies that were here at the time when all this got going were not necessarily competing from a product standpoint. They may have competed for talent, but they weren't necessarily viewing each other strictly as competitors. And so getting back to what we were talking about earlier, what I mentioned earlier around kind of pre-competitive collaboration, I think that was one of the big wins, I think, in North Carolina. When I look back at the history, is, we started bringing companies together, we started bringing the industry together, and initially they viewed everything they did within their walls as proprietary. And we can't talk shop, we can't tell you about our process. And as those walls came down around, at least around developing training programs, I think they started realizing that, okay, 85, 90% of what we do isn't proprietary.
Mhm.
It's all common. We're all doing it the same way. So
Yeah.
we can talk about this. And so I think as those walls started coming down, it sort of paved the way for a lot more collaboration that has really stuck around ever since. So it's been good.
That's fascinating. You know, I think history is so important, right? Memory is so important. And sometimes we don't think about memory in terms of more of a macroeconomic scale or as a socioeconomic scale. But you know, the historical element that this started with an institution that had kind of already established trust with NC Bio Center, and then also, like you mentioned, the site heads coming together and that leadership creates a memory, and that leadership kind of creates the fact that that's been going on for a while creates kind of an expectation. I mean, I've been down there several times, and I was invited to one of the monthly or quarterly biomanufacturing forums, and I was extremely impressed. I mean, around the room, Fujifilm and the site heads were all there.
Yep.
Right? Nobody was sending a surrogate. The site heads were all there, and that was incredible. And just from other experiences I've had in other regions, you don't always see that. And I think so. Just to kind of harp on this industry led, I mean, this is something we've talked about a lot. I think again, you don't, Major League Baseball, right? They don't look to the local state to support their farm league and be like, all right, where's my next round of players, right? The institution has to invest and be part of the solution and be part of their long-term success. And I think, just to echo, I think that's something that the North Carolina region has fostered really well. Again, it's been something worked on for 40 years. It sounds like. I mean, this isn't overnight.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah.
And it's not, and I think the other thing, and I don't think it, and I think the rest of the country has caught up. I mean, and so it isn't just North Carolina. And I think it's becoming, it's really fascinating to see how, workforce, economic development, all these issues have really become front and stage for, for most of the rest of the U.S. around biomanufacturing or biopharma manufacturing. So that's really kind of cool to see. Yeah.
I mean, COVID is as horrible as COVID was, and I still have blackout a couple of years of what happened, during that time. But it really did put workforce and biotech front and center of the conversation.
Yeah.
And I think we all came through that experience understanding how important, and talent acquisition had a larger voice at the table, and workforce development and diversity didn't just become, buzzwords that at the boardroom level. These things became critical to the success and of the current success as well as future success of our companies.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's kind of where we remain today. And again, if there's one thing in this industry we learned is if everything's going to be dynamic and change, sometimes polarizing, markets that we've seen over the past 3 years, but workforce, no matter what, has been still front and center of as critical importance.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, good. What else is going across the industry? I mean, we hyped up North Carolina enough. I mean, and like you said, there's a lot of other great things happening. I'm in Maryland. We have BioHub Maryland, which is an initiative run by the Maryland Tech Council. You mentioned they just signed a big agreement with NIIMBL to do workforce training, and they're building out a workforce training development center up in Frederick right now, which is, has a ton of biomanufacturing with Kite and AstraZeneca and Lonza, and several others up there. So I know that's one that's happening here in Maryland that we're all proud of and we're excited for. But what do you see across the landscape? Maybe you can share some thoughts on some key issues, trends, or.
Well, so I can comment on what am I seeing, and then trends separately. So I think the first, what am I seeing? I'm seeing that I have a lot of reading to do to play catch up, and I think it's fascinating to see. It's not just North Carolina, Boston, Maryland, and California as sort of the big leaders in kind of biomanufacturing. You're seeing, major EDA funding around, biopharma manufacturing or biopharma or biotech in general, going into Oklahoma, going into Kansas, going into Texas, going into regions that normally wouldn't be seen as, as the leader are suddenly up and coming, in terms of little biotech clusters. And I think all that's great. The company, as I said earlier, I mean, our country needs the infrastructure. We need that sort of, diverse spread of where the industry's at. And I think that's going to happen. Trends, sort of what I'm watching and what I'm interested in, what I'm kind of curious about is really this whole realm of what I'll call, skills first hiring or non-traditional pathways into the industry. Our industry has always been, as very locked into, bachelor's, master's, PhD routes for hiring. And, it's cool to see that the industry is slowly embracing and trying to figure out how to embrace pathways like, credentialing, micro-credentials, badging, certifications, apprenticeships. Apprenticeships in particular are, it's really interesting to me to see a lot of different companies and a lot of different regions all somewhat independently and or collectively pursuing apprenticeship efforts. And so I'm really curious to see how this unfolds, how it changes the whole hiring climate within manufacturing in particular over the next couple years.
Apprentices is one I'm definitely interested in following too. It's been, it's used in Europe. Just it's like, commonplace, right? That's how, people are going to work in biomanufacturing. And I think there's a tremendous upside to, more widespread adoption of that, including, which I know is a big concern, is employee retention.
Yeah.
It costs a lot to train someone, 6 months of training to get up to speed on SOPs and processes. And, an apprenticeship programs really do provide a very win-win type of scenario that I think as we look if we look 24 months into the future, I know we're in kind of a, we're seeing layoffs now and things like that. And everyone's kind of worried about where we are today, but not losing sight of the future. We're still in a labor crunch when this all kind of continues out into 2025 and 26. So apprenticeships are really definitely an interesting approach, and I think there's a lot that that states and other organizations can do can help lower the barrier to, like, the administrative barrier and things like that.
Yeah,
I think I hear as objections right now.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of challenges, not just around apprenticeships, but around all these. And I think it's on both sides. And I think, me and you have talked about some of this before, but and I think it's important that all the sides of, all the players involved understand how complicated this is. And, I look at something like, let's look at degree requirements. And so, what you'll see if you look in manufacturing jobs across most of the industry is a lot of the industry has changed degree requirements and job descriptions in manufacturing roles so that they're not required. But that doesn't mean that the biases don't exist within the hiring managers. I mean, you have talked about the need to kind of reduce, or increase the risk tolerance of the folks that are making, those hiring managers that are making the decision to pull the trigger. And that's not a TA thing. That's really down to the level of the hiring manager. And that's the ground level. It's every single person that you've got to change. And I think, it's issues around equity and compensation and what happens when you've got pay bands that are all built around a workforce of people with degrees. And now you're going to start throwing people without degrees into that manufacturing workforce. That all needs to be figured out and solved. And some companies are really good at solving that and have solved that. Other companies are just figuring that out. And I think that's where there's going to be probably some competitive, play over the next couple of years, I think.
Yeah. And some companies are just along for the ride going, these large companies I got to compete with them. I was at an event the other day and I was with a small 30-person company and they say, I have to pay the same as, XYZ big pharma Fortune 200 company down the street. I can't afford not to because I'm not going to get talent.
Yeah.
And some of them just have to kind of take whoever's, leading the lion's share of the workforce and kind of follow along.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that's interesting. So the pathways approach, I think, is really, I'm following that very closely as well. Again, especially since we want to build the the pipes and the roads, to help people get there. That's a really important element. And a lot of this stuff too is, and de-risking. I think you mentioned, you and I've talked about that. I mean, I talk to CHROs and I talk to hiring managers. As a recruiter, I'm trying to work with a hiring manager to get someone approved, and there's always that risk. It's because the decisions they make impact their job as well. And I think those are, again, just shows that this. Hopefully, this conversation was enlightening to a lot of people listening and watching, but also showing people how complicated this challenge is that we're trying to face. And John can't do it alone. Everybody, come on, he's trying. So.
There's a lot of others out there that are very equally as passionate, if not more than I am. So I'm glad to not be alone in this. And that's It's funny. I used to joke with a peer that 20 years ago there were only a couple dozen of us in the country that cared about this sort of thing, and it's a much larger community now, and that's great to see.
It's a great community, and there's a lot of people really dedicated to finding solutions, and I think that's where some camaraderie can happen and some shared experiences, and I think at the end of the day, the patients are impacted and we're all impacted by the results. But it is, we still have to get through some of the challenges to get there first.
Yep.
Well, I want to respect everybody's time today and your time for being our guest today. I've really enjoyed the conversation. I always enjoy the conversation with you. I always feel like we always have 3 or 4 more conversations we have to have whenever we have one of these talks.
Agreed.
But let me give you last words. Any closing remarks or thoughts that you want to share with the audience?
No, I mean, I think I've gotten it all out. I just want to say thank you for the opportunity. I mean, it's, I'm always happy to kind of come out and plug NIIMBL, talk a little bit about what we're doing. It's a shared challenge. And I think there's a lot of very passionate people working on this problem, and, it's going to take all those minds to do it. So I'm just happy to have the opportunity to come on and talk.
Wonderful. Well, we really appreciate it. We'll share more about the upcoming conference and the webinar in November. We'll share that with our audience. And of course, BioBuzz, we want to be a place where you can come and contribute and be part of that solution and connect with people like John and others. I saw a lot of people commenting today. So again, I think if you want to get involved because it's going to take a lot of hands to make a change and to help to move the needle. So John, with from all of us at BioBuzz, thank you for joining today's What's the Buzz on building a nimble workforce. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Happy to be here. Thanks.
My pleasure. All right. Thanks, everybody.